They're mocking us whilst wrecking the country, and for reasons of us coming out of the EU. Okay? And if you don't believe us, you don't understand the scriptures. Chedorlaomer. Remember Genesis? The great battle? Chedorlaomer, tidal king. There was a split in the union, as there was in Joseph's time. There was a union of cities, countries, nations, peoples. And when one seceded from another, a battle began, didn't it? From the very ones that had been seceded from. And Abraham rescued Lot. Come on, let's go to the more recent times, 1861 to 65. The American Civil War. 11 states seceded from the North. 11 out of the 13. What did the North do in anger? Just like the battles in the Old Testament there? Between nations that had joined together and then split. What did he do? What did the North do under Abraham Lincoln? Went to war. Got upset. We want a union. A union of states. That's what it was termed, Union of States. Abraham Lincoln wanted to continue to be the president of a union of states. He couldn't have it. There was spite. There was upset. He went to war and bloodshed. What do you think leaving the EU means? Came out of the EU, didn't we? So-called. Alright? But that embarrassed the British government, because that said to the entire world that the British people ruled the British government. And the British government can't have that. And the baby was the EU. That was the British government's baby. We had the EU before 1973. We were signed up before 1973 by the British government under Edward Heath. It was just a performance to go to the country to vote. It was already skewed. It was already signed up. So the outcome would be to join the EEC. And people went up in arms, didn't they? And then in 1975, they were pushed in 1974 to come to 75 to have another election of the EEC, because the people wanted out. And all of a sudden the people wanted in. So it's skewed, you see. But what I'm saying is that wherever there's a union and there's been a sudden break, one party gets angry, very, 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 very angry and vicious. Very angry and vicious. Now the only way to settle a separation is to gradually do it. Peaceful terms, gradually, over time. That's the way to do it. Not suddenly. Nature doesn't like a sudden shock. Okay? But this day and age is fascinating because it is shallow. Again, it is shallow. People are like sheep and donkeys. They're following and nodding the way of government, the way of media, and the government and media have taken control of the minds of people. And we Christians stand out, and at least we should stand out. We shouldn't be repeating, oh, you know, what's going on in the world. We shouldn't be saying, oh, this COVID, the sheep virus. We shouldn't. We should be saying, this is nonsense. Where's the evidence? The only evidence is on the TV, this devil's vision. There's the only evidence. That is the only evidence. There's none in real life. None whatsoever. Can you find it in hospitals? No. Is there an atmosphere of death? As there are in real plagues? No. Everything is just light. Isn't it? The atmosphere is light. People are going about not worried. They're just performing a play. They're acting. Stick the masks on. They're not worried. They're just playing around. Government is saying do this, and they do it. Government says do that, and they do it. Media says do this, they do it. Alright? Nobody ever expects this world to end. It will end. The world of Noah ended. Our world ended, didn't it? Huh? Didn't it? If you're a Christian, your world ended. My world ended. Thousands of souls, their world ended. We went along one day, just like the apostle, just like Saul of Tarsus, doing our daily business, in a world of our own, being indoctrinated by this world out here. Everything was normal. Then all of a sudden, our world stopped. Our world went. Our world was destroyed. And we came into a different world. The world that is the paradise of God. The Jerusalem of God. The Zion of God. A spiritual upper world. We had been resurrected from the grave and transported upwards to a new world. And as John says in chapter 21, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. All things are passed away. Pardon me. Wasn't it? I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Of course he did. That's the experience of justification by faith. And old things pass away and all things become new because we're in a new world. Alright, and I saw an angel. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. There was no more sea of contention. There was no more sea of contention between us and God. And he stood there, and he sees what we see. A brand new heaven. A heaven not made of brass. A heaven which we can go into and communicate with and draw out of things old and things new. Our world is not out there. It's up there. And the seed of it is in our hearts. Let us be awake. Out there is their titular little Hitlers. And they're getting worse and worse. The mockers, the self-conceit, the ignorant, the brash, the violent, the superfluous, the new world out there of shallowness and of excitement and of fear. Sorry, not of fear, but of shouting and gaiety. There's very little you can say to people these days of any depth. They don't understand, unless it's been on the TV, unless it's come from government equally. They don't understand. They're willingly ignorant. And of course we have this day and generation that says, well, you know, people have been brought up like this, and you know, the lefty opinion. People have been brought up like this and brought up like that and brought up like the other. Yes, fine, yes, okay. So I wasn't. Alright, I wasn't. Oh well, it's alright for you. And the excuses come. In other words, there is no personal responsibility being taught today. It's all excuses. It's all excuses. And if you do something with your life and improve your life by the grace of God, you're criticised for doing so. Because this person over here hasn't had the chance. Do you know my life? Do you know how I got to this position in life? Let me explain. And then you tell me if this person cannot get up off their backside and do something with their life. Because hundreds of thousands of us start where they start, at the bottom of the pile. But we take ourselves in hand. We take personal responsibility. We make something of our lives. We don't harp on about our backgrounds. We know our backgrounds. But they will not take us into bondage with that background. That background is that background, and that's it. We press on, and press on, and press on, and it makes you a man, and it makes you a woman. It doesn't make you a soft, degenerate person like this. Sorry, but it just angers me that this world is so full of excuses for itself. It's not manly anymore. It's not manly. Everybody has to bow down to the authorities. Oh, rubbing their hands. I'm ever so humble, Mr. MP. Oh, MP. Oh, I see you've got some blacking on your shoes and it's gone onto me tongue. What is that? This is the day we're living in. And in what Peter says here, remember. He brings into remembrance the days that have gone. And bringing into the days that have gone, he's reminding people equally that they should stand as adults. They should grow to be adults, to be mature, so that therefore then you can pass it on to the next generation and encourage them to come up. You should be pillars for the next generation to lean upon. Not self-centered. Not I. That does nothing good for anybody, not even yourself. Implosion is the worst thing you can be. If you concentrate upon yourself, you'll destroy yourself. But then again, that's man for you. That's the generality of man, not all. Generality. The second commandment is gone because the first commandment is gone. As it were, the first table of the law has been abandoned. The gospel has been abandoned, which is the first table of the law, and therefore the second has been abandoned. And the gospel continues to be attacked by the Arminians and their theatrical side, neo-evangelicalism, the gospel. And it's so pervasive that people believe that the gospel is just simply Calvary. It is not Calvary. Even that blackguard, John Nelson Darby, knew what the gospel was and referred it to Calvary. Because he hated the gospel. Arminians hate the gospel, detest the gospel. Jay and Darby cast the gospel off into the future, knowing that the future in his terms and in other terms of other people would never arrive. It never does. The end is nigh! The end is nigh! The end is nigh. Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 and 7 tells us what the gospel is. The gospel. And from the gospel we have the four gospels and so on and so forth. But the principle of the gospel is laid down as the law of God, which is never preached. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel, to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God, that's the gospel, and give glory to him, that's the gospel. For the hour of his judgment is come, and to worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the foundation of waters. That's the gospel. This was preached to the consciences of men and women and children within Adam. The judgment had come. Adam had sinned, the judgment came, and from Adam being the father and federal head of mankind, that gospel was preached to him. And that is why every child knows good and bad, good and evil, right and wrong. Doesn't have to be taught, and indeed in these days is never taught by these so-called families, but they know it as we knew it. How do we know it? Because it's being preached in the midst of heaven, in Adam. Heaven in the midst is conscience. It's where conscience lies. It's that middle ground. And your Darwinists, atheists so-called, we say to them, where does conscience come from? If we were all physically created, where does conscience come from? Where does good and evil within the conscience come from? How do we know truth and error? To tell the truth is better than to tell a lie. Where does it come from? It's spiritual. You see, with these people, God is manifesting to them, not just in nature, but in their consciences. And they try to cover that up. We've only got to address their conscience. And we should be fully persuaded by that conscience that they have. That middle ground between heaven and hell. That they know God. They do know God. There's no arguing about that in that sense. Oh, they can argue it. And they will argue it because they don't want their consciences to keep saying to them God exists. Their consciences tell them God exists. We want to go address it that way. That your conscience tells you God exists. And therefore, this is why you are in a fight. If you believe that God does not exist, you wouldn't fight. You'd just walk on. I don't believe in Darwinism. I just walk on. I have nothing to do with it. I couldn't tell you the first thing about Darwinism. I just walk on. My conscience isn't engaged in Darwinism. My conscience is engaged in the spiritual world with God. And so is every man. And again, that's why the so-called atheist fights. If he wasn't pushing in on his conscience wasn't fighting with him, he wouldn't be fighting back. And he has to be verbal about it. Trying to get it out. And the more they cry and cry against creation, the more they struggle against it, is to try and soothe their consciences that are continually telling them God exists. The more they do it, the more the conscience says God exists. We need to wake up. If you can't see these things, why? Get some eye salve. Get to thinking. Examining. At the end of the day. Okay, we've still got these people out there who form their own ideas. Their thoughts are formed from their own principles. Out here. We shouldn't be thinking like they're thinking. We shouldn't be following what they're following. Hey? Their thoughts are their own. Whoa! Hey? Their principles are their own. They come from corrupt hearts. That follow corrupt governments and follow corrupt media. And follow just corruption because the bias is towards corruption. And it's very, very magnetic. You can switch on this abomination and be drawn in to the lies and the deceit of the news broadcasts. There is that magnetic quality. There is that drawing in, that unholy drawing in of the unholy flesh towards